Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1031B, and today's date is July 25th, 2016, and the title of the episode is Germany Wants to Change Their Constitution to Allow the Military to be Used Domestically. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, as we know, the European Union, they created this system where they allow people to move in and out of the countries, and it was called the Schengen. And we can see now that they're pushing the same exact agenda in Africa. It is called the African Union, the AU. And they just announced that it has launched, for the first time, a single passport for all citizens on the continent. Now, the AU consists of about 54 countries. The only country in Africa which is not part of the Union is Morocco. They opted out. And we can see right now they're doing the same thing the EU did. And actually, most likely, this is part of the entire same system. And what we're seeing right now is they're using this to convince everyone that this is going to improve trade. It's going to promote freedom of movement across the continent. And when you step back even further, we can see that the European Union, the African Union, the North American Union, what they're doing is they're slowly, and they do this very, very carefully, very methodically, where they say this is good for the people. But what you can see is they're breaking everything into large chunks so they can later merge this all together into the New World Order. And that's why they keep talking about the New World Order. And they do this very slowly, because once they get this created, and they're still on the path. I know everyone's like, well, they're not using the Schengen. A lot of the countries are fighting back. But in their minds, they haven't stopped. They're still on the track to go for that goal of the New World Order. And we can see this is exactly what they're doing. They're breaking it off, and they're taking each one of the regions. And eventually what they're going to try to do, when all's said and done, is merge them and say we need one big union. There'll be no borders. There'll be no countries. We will just be one big union, and the central bank will control everything. Again, this is their main goal. This is what they wanted from the beginning. Will it happen? Well, not if the people have a say, because the people need to look at this. The people have to understand what's going on. And we can see how it's working out in the EU at this point, where the EU is a non-elected body. The EU dictates to the countries what they want them to do. If you don't follow our orders, you don't get the funds. And they have complete control of the country. The country loses its sovereignty. And this is what they're pushing for. Now, out in Turkey, we understand the coup is continuing. Erdogan is still purging many individuals inside the country. And what we're seeing right now is that Erdogan, he is becoming more and more powerful. Erdogan is now being referred to as Turkey's commander-in-chief, which would indicate, among other things, that he regards the attempted coup as a personal attack on his figure. Now, whatever the coup plotters' motives were, the end result of their actions, well, has made Erdogan very powerful. He has taken control of his country. And we can see right now that he has full control of his country. Now, Turkey's foreign minister has said that the ties with the U.S. could turn sour unless Washington extradites the cleric Gulen. His statement comes ahead of his trip to the U.S., and he's going to discuss with U.S. officials the terms of having Gulen extradited to Turkey. Now, Washington is out there telling Turkey, listen, you need evidence for us to go ahead with this extradition. And of course, they're saying this is going to take years before we can extradite Gulen. Now, very interestingly, Turkish prosecutors are now investigating people who have alleged on social media and elsewhere that the coup was a complete hoax carried out by the government. And the country's justice minister said that they're going to crack down on those people who are speaking about this. And of course, this is a crackdown on free speech. Now, we know Erdogan does not care about free speech. We understand that he blocks Twitter, he blocks YouTube, anything that is against him personally, or someone outs him on a false flag. He blocks social media, trying to contain the situation. But something we need to be worried about, that there was this coup. Erdogan is becoming more and more of a dictator, gaining more power. And we see that the U.S. right now is working with Turkey, but not working with Turkey. And they're using Gulen as the scapegoat, where they're saying, yes, you can extradite him. Yes, the U.S. will work with you, but it's going to take years. Meanwhile, in the underground vaults in Turkey, we have those B-61 tactical nuclear bombs. Now, they have about 60 to 80. We don't know the exact count. And what we're seeing is that there are concerns about these nukes in this area. Now, what are they concerned about? Well, they can fall into the wrong hands. They might be used in Syria. This is what they're worried about. Now, when we look at the entire situation in the Middle East, we understand things are becoming out of control. The U.S. is losing their grip on the Middle East. And as they continually lose their grip, it's becoming more and more difficult. Putin understands this. Putin realizes that the U.S. is not going to just let this go. They want to complete their goal of removing Assad. This is why there was a precondition on the ceasefire peace talks with Lavrov. So Putin just came out, and he's out there saying, listen, playtime is over. Putin gave a speech. He said Russia will no longer play games and engage in backroom negotiations over these situations. Russia is prepared for serious conversation and agreements if these are conducive to collective security and based on fairness and take into account the interest of each side. He said, all systems of global collective security now lie in ruins. There are no longer any international security guarantees at all. They're all destroyed by the United States. The builders of the New World Order have failed, having built a sandcastle. Russia, he said, will not attempt to reformat the world, but neither will Russia allow any other country to reformat the world. Russia does not wish for chaos to spread. It does not want war, has no intention of starting one. However, today Russia sees the outbreak of global war as almost inevitable. Putin said Russia's power will rely not on the elites and their backroom dealings, but on the will of the people. Actually, we're seeing a very big switch where Russia now is talking about democracy, the will of the people, what the people want, this is what the people should get. The U.S. is doing the opposite. We will give you the government we want you to have. You elected this government, we will remove it and give you a different one. We want Assad to resign so we can put in a puppet government. So we're seeing a switch at this point where the United States is no longer freedom and democracy, and Putin is pushing for the people to vote for their leader in Syria. Now we can see that this is what's happening right now. And he understands that the West is pushing for war. We see China, Russia, trying to put out the fire. Every time the U.S. tries to fan the flames, they come in and say, no. Let's not start a war here. But we know the U.S., the neocons, they're not going to stop. They're going to continue on until they get that war. Now, a couple reports ago, we reported on the United States going into Manbij in Syria, giving the Islamic State an offer. Fight or leave peacefully with your weapons. And we know the Islamic State is the proxy army of the United States government central bankers and the coalition forces. And we're getting reports now that the Islamic State has accepted the offer of the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is the moderate rebels, to leave the city of Manbij. How interesting. I mean, this reminds me of when the United States government central bankers, they were going to bomb the oil convoy because Russia pointed it out and said, here they are if you cannot find them. Russia was already bombing them, so the United States had to make it look good, and they dropped flyers, leaflets, warning the drivers to get out, which were the Islamic State, to get out of their vehicles because we were about to bomb this area. Well, they've done the same thing here. They don't want to destroy their proxy army. They want the moderate rebels to take this position in Aleppo, and they're allowing the Islamic State to leave and go to a different location, and the United States can say, okay, the Syrian Democratic Forces, or the moderate rebels, whatever you like to call them, they're just terrorists, they now have this area in Aleppo, and you cannot fire upon them, according to the ceasefire deal. This is what the U.S. has been doing. We see already the Islamic State is claiming, and this is coming out of Rita Katz's site intelligence, which is a Mossad operation. They're saying that they shot down a U.S. jet in Iraq. Now, the U.S. right now is denying this. The reports are unconfirmed. But the question is, why would they want this out here? Why would they want everyone to know that the Islamic State shot down a warplane? Because they want people to understand that the Islamic State has the ability to shoot down warplanes. Now, maybe the U.S. is going to look for a no-fly zone in this area to keep everything grounded except for the U.S. planes. But we'll have to wait and see how this turns out, because there is always a reason why they put these stories forward, or I should say propaganda forward. Now, we understand out in Germany, we had two events now. One in Munich, where this individual went around shooting people. We also had this other false flag where a person, a 27-year-old man, identified as a Syrian refugee, blew himself up near the entrance of the festival in the Bavarian town of Ansbach near Nuremberg. And they're saying that he injured about 12 people there. Now, of course, the German Interior Minister came out and said the attacks are completely unrelated to the refugee policy, had nothing to do with that, because as we know, Merkel is backing up the idea that it's okay for refugees to come into the country, we can't blame anything on them, and we know there's been a lot of crimes, a lot of disease, and a lot of things that occurred with the refugees. Now, I have nothing against the refugees, but we have to go to the root of the problem. The root of the problem with the refugees is that the United States is causing this. The United States, with all its wars in the Middle East, has caused the refugee problem. They had a deal with Turkey where the refugees from Syria, from Iraq, from Libya, Lebanon would all flow into Turkey. They would house them there until it was needed to flood the European countries. And once they flooded the European countries, they wanted Europe to react, to join the coalition forces by bringing in more troops, more military assets to go after Assad. And with these events that we've been seeing, they are hooked to many different agendas. One, as we noticed since the shooting in Munich, they're looking for additional gun control laws. Two, they're always bringing in the idea that they need more surveillance in the country. 3, we can see many countries after an event, they allow the military to occupy the country for protection of the people. And we can see out in Germany, their constitution only allows military use in cases of national emergency. And what they would like to do is they're pushing for a revision of the German constitution after the mass shooting and this latest bombing, where they're saying this is a national emergency. Now, the limits were put in place immediately after the destruction of the Nazi government. And it looks like we're heading down the same path where Germany would like to declare a national emergency and allow the troops to occupy the homeland. I mean, the French have done this. They're in a state of emergency right now. And we're starting to see this spread to many different countries. The U.S. right now, as we know, they're allowing the police to purchase military-grade items. And we're seeing a lot of countries do the same thing. Now, all of this is being done because they understand what is happening here. As the economy continually deteriorates, this is what we're going to see. Because they understand there's going to be riots. Country is going to get out of control. The officials are worried and scared that the people are going to come after them. And as we move through this summer, we're going to see more and more of these events. It's not going to stop. And this has nothing to do with, oh, there's terrorism. This has to do with the system coming down. This has to do with the private Western Central Bank system collapsing. And what they need to do is they need to cover up this economic collapse. Now, we realize right now that the United States, they've been working on a plan since 2001. And that is to go into each one of these countries, Yemen, Sudan, Libya, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, then Iran, to keep the system propped up. And they haven't deviated from this plan at all. They went into these countries and they removed the elected leaders and replaced them with a puppet government. And here we are in Syria for 5 to 6 years later, and they're still pushing the same goal. It has not changed. Now, the plan with Lavrov, the Russian government, was to join forces and go after the terrorists. But we know the terrorists are the proxy armies of the United States government, central bankers, the coalition forces. And the only way they'd go after the terrorists is if Assad was removed. That's why they had the precondition. Now, since Russia has said once again that the elected people will decide, what is the United States going to do? What is their next move? Because we know right now the elected people of Syria are going to vote for Assad. He brought in Russia. They removed the terrorism in the country, not all of it, of course, but a lot of it. They've been pushing the Islamic State back, and the people see him as a war hero. So the United States at this point, they have what option that is left? Well, the only option they have is to create some incredible event to bring about war. And this is why we are seeing Ashton Carter go around to all the European countries, telling them we need more military assets, telling them we need more troops. This is why the refugees were let out. This is why we're seeing the events occur around the European nations. It's to get them angry and to have them go into Syria and say, enough is enough, we can't take this anymore. This was their plan. I mean, it's backfiring in many different areas, but their plan was to get them angry enough to push Assad out. And right now, the United States, their backs are against the wall. So we're watching for the next move. And we're seeing aircrafts being brought into the Mediterranean. We're seeing more forces being brought into Syria. They're creating bases. And the situation is just going to heat up. And we are going to see the Big Bang. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.